Okay, so sometimes life will just give us impossible situations, and there seems like no solution, nothing to be done. We're just kind of helpless victims. So, personally, I think because life can be like this, in the Eastern spiritual traditions, spiritual teachers would use something called a koan to help individuals move out of their intellect, move past their emotional prison, come into enlightenment. Okay, so a koan, like life, is impossible to answer. It's like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? I mean, what is it? There isn't any sound. So, what the teacher would look for is an answer that came from the student's heart, from the student's soul. And in a way, it didn't matter what the logical answer was, what the answer was given. It was the teacher would hear where it came from. So if it came from the soul, then the teacher would validate it and the student would pass that test. But another student could have been overhearing, may have overheard that the answer was accepted. Say maybe the student who passed said a rose, because that's what came up out of their soul after they had banged their head against this question for weeks. Maybe it just was this, a rose in all its beauty. And when the teacher heard it, the teacher would hear that the student had bypassed his intellect or her intellect. And so the answer had this grace to it. But again, if another student overheard this and just trotted out the rose, the teacher would hear that it was the ego level, would even hear that the student had cheated. The student might be expelled. You see, but what the teachers looked for was the authenticity of the soul response, because the questions were unanswerable to the intellect. And they were used to help free students out of their emotional prison into enlightenment. So really, life does this to us. It will give us koans, impossible situations, just impossible. But there's a solution. And, if we tap into our soul energy, the ending can be quite auspicious. You read about sometimes people are in car accidents or have some kind of accident, and their injuries should have been much worse than they were, or they recovered much more quickly than expected. If your soul wants you up and healthy and healed, you'll be healed. It will just happen. If that's what your life requires, even if you have something like a car accident, it will be all right. So it's like always just be ready to tap into that soul level. For an answer. The biggest koan in my life was when my son, as a child, was diagnosed with terminal leukemia, and we were given that the doctor said there was no hope of recovery. And his blood count at its worst was 60,000, and he just sat there. White cell count. So he just sat there and his skin was so white it was almost transparent. And I just had this moment where I just went, I don't really think it has to happen this way. And through prayer, it was just this magical moment where I felt heaven and earth meet, and that I was just to hold the space for something else to happen than his death. And indeed, he recovered. Fully recovered, over 3 years. And in the agent of this was Olga Worrell, who was she's passed, but she was a very famous healer in the U.S. who particularly worked with children. And over 3 years of him of she working with him, he healed completely. So just remember, like, hold out for the magical answer. Hold out for a soul-based answer to the koan that you're facing. Even if it seems impossible, and what is the answer to what is the sound of one hand clapping? The question's ridiculous, but it was just to help us out of our intellects. So, the good news about this difficult time is we're being thrown back on our own resources, and we can turn to our hearts and turn to our souls and receive answers. And you deserve that, Why not? Yeah, why not? Okay, bless your hearts.